My name is Amina Hassan, and I am 46 years old. My life, at least to the outside world, appeared flawless. I had built a successful career as an accountant, and I was blessed with a devoted husband, Amir, and 3 beautiful children. Samira, who was 14, Youssef, 11, and little Zainab, who had just turned 8. Together, we made a close-knit family, bound not only by love but also by our shared faith. Islam was at the heart of everything I did. It was more than just a religion to me. It was my identity, my guiding light, and my strength. I never missed a prayer, fasted every Ramadan, and gave generously to those in need. Completing the pilgrimage to Mecca twice was one of my proudest accomplishments. In our community, I was known for my eloquent recitation of the Quran, often being invited to lead prayer gatherings or teach children the sacred verses. Faith was a central part of my life, interwoven with every decision I made. I had even helped 2 of my colleagues find their way to Islam, which filled me with pride. Amir and I were determined to raise our children to follow the same path, instilling in them the values of prayer, modesty, and a life free from worldly distractions. Every choice I made was driven by my belief that this was the path to eternal salvation. Despite all of this outward devotion, there were moments of inner turmoil, quiet, unsettling moments, that I kept hidden from even Amir. Late at night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, doubts would sometimes sneak in. How could a merciful Allah condemn good people to eternal punishment just because they weren't Muslim? It didn't seem just. Why were women's testimonies valued less than men's? And why were inheritance laws so different for us? I knew the answers I had been taught, that Allah's wisdom surpassed human understanding. But the doubts remained, small yet persistent, like thorns buried deep within my heart. One day, Samira asked me a question that struck me to the core. Her best friend Chloe, a sweet and caring girl, wasn't Muslim. "Mama," Samira asked, "why would Chloe go to hell? She's such a good person." I gave her the standard answer I had always heard, that belief in the wrong religion meant eternal damnation. But as the words left my mouth, they felt empty, as though I was trying to convince myself just as much as I was trying to convince her. I quickly changed the subject, but that weight lingered in my heart. Still, life went on, and my faith provided a rhythm that helped to keep the doubts at bay, at least most of the time. The morning of May 5, 2023, began like any other. I woke up before dawn to perform the Fajr prayer, moving quietly through the house while everyone else was still asleep. Afterward, I prepared breakfast, ensuring Samira had everything for school. Youssef didn't forget his lunch, and little Zainab brushed her hair. Amir kissed me goodbye before leaving for work, and I gathered my things for an accounting meeting I had later that day in Edinburgh. The weather was unexpectedly sunny for May in Aberdeen, with a gentle breeze filling the air with the scent of blooming flowers. I remember feeling a deep sense of gratitude as I drove to the office, the Quran softly playing on the car stereo. Life felt steady and secure. But as I merged onto the main motorway, a large truck caught my attention. It was carrying steel pipes, stacked high and secured by frayed straps that didn't look very reliable. I kept my distance, uneasy but distracted by the meeting ahead. Ramadan was fast approaching, and my thoughts wandered to the meals I would prepare, the extra prayers I'd perform, and the lectures I planned to attend at the mosque. The doubts that had been silently gnawing at me, the uncertainty surrounding rigid doctrines and Samira's innocent questions, seemed so distant at that moment. Life was busy, and there was always something to focus on. Yet, as I followed that truck down the motorway, an inexplicable sense of dread began to build. Something didn't feel right. The moment everything changed felt like time had fractured. The truck hit a small bump in the road, and I watched in horror as the steel pipes shifted dangerously. In an instant, one of the straps snapped, sending the pipes rolling forward. I slammed my foot on the brake, but it was too late. A gust of wind caught the pipes, sending them hurtling through the air like missiles. It all happened so fast, it felt surreal. One of the pipes came straight toward my windshield, glinting briefly in the sunlight before crashing into the glass. The sound of metal smashing against metal was deafening, followed by the sharp screech of tires on the road. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and I swerved, trying desperately to avoid the flying debris, but there was no escape. My last thought before everything went black was a whispered shahada, and then, nothing. If you are not subscribed, I recommend subscribing and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. When I first opened my eyes, everything felt completely foreign to me. The world around me seemed disjointed, almost like a dream, and for a moment, I couldn't understand where I was or what had happened. It wasn't the familiar comfort of my car that I had expected to see. No, instead, I found myself floating above it all, detached, untethered. The scene beneath me was chaotic, like the aftermath of a terrible storm, but strangely, I felt calm. The sound of frantic footsteps, the hasty calls of paramedics, the swish of their uniforms as they rushed around. It all seemed distant, muted, as though I were watching from behind a veil. There was no panic, no fear on my part. I was strangely serene, almost numb to the overwhelming sense of urgency that engulfed everyone below. Beneath me, my car was a twisted heap of metal, unrecognizable, bent, and contorted in ways I didn't think were possible. It no longer resembled the vehicle that had been my constant companion, the one I trusted and relied on every day. The paramedics worked with intensity, their faces etched with concern, as they carefully extracted me from the wreckage. Their every movement was precise, but also frantic, as they tried to save me from whatever had happened. And there was the truck driver. I could see him pacing nearby, wringing his hands in helplessness, his face pale with shock. His eyes betrayed his fear, his mind struggling to process the reality of what had occurred. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by the commotion, whispering among themselves, their murmurs barely audible above the ambient noise of the scene. I could feel their gaze, their curiosity, but I didn't feel the usual discomfort of being watched. Instead, I felt an odd peace, a sense of detachment from the world around me. As if this wasn't happening to me, but to someone else, someone far removed from the person I had been. I looked down at what was left of my body. At first, I didn't even recognize it. The limbs, the bloodied clothing, the mangled shape of it, it didn't feel like mine. It was a shell, nothing more. I couldn't feel the pain. There were no sharp stabs of agony or the weight of my injuries weighing me down. There was only stillness, a profound emptiness that somehow felt like a release. I wasn't bound by the limitations of the flesh anymore. I felt untethered, free in a way that words couldn't even begin to explain. The worries and struggles that had plagued me throughout my life, my fears, regrets, and doubts didn't matter anymore. It was as if, at that moment, I had transcended them, shedding all the weight I had carried for so long. I was floating, weightless, in a space between worlds, and I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even questioning it. I simply was. And then there was the light. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, but as it grew, I felt its warmth wrap around me. It wasn't like the harsh, unforgiving brightness of the sun or the cold, clinical glow of artificial lights. No, this light was different. It was soft, yet strong. Alive. Intelligent. It wasn't just a light, it was a presence, a force that seemed to hum with a deep, cosmic energy. And it wasn't coming from any specific source. It enveloped me from all directions, pouring into me, around me, through me. It was everywhere and nowhere, and somehow, I knew it was meant for me. There was a comfort in this light, a reassurance I didn't know I needed. As it surrounded me, I felt something inside me shift. It was as if every fear, every doubt, every painful memory that had ever lingered within me was being soothed, erased. The warmth wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual. It penetrated the very core of my being, making me feel safe, accepted, and loved in a way that no human connection had ever achieved. It wasn't a love I had experienced before, not the love of family or friends, not the kind of love born from obligation or expectation. No, this was something far greater, something far purer. It was a love that had no strings attached, no conditions, no judgments. It was love that simply existed, and it wrapped itself around me, pulling me into its embrace. As I allowed myself to drift closer to this light, it felt as though all the walls I had built around my heart were beginning to crumble, one by one. I wasn't consciously trying to let go of my fears or hesitations, but they were melting away regardless. With every step I took toward the light, I felt a weight lift off me, physically and emotionally. It was as though I were shedding the skin of my former self, the person I had been in life. The things that once seemed so crucial, the struggles I had fought so hard against, they all faded into the background, insignificant in the face of this overwhelming peace. And then I saw him. The figure standing within the light. At first, I didn't fully comprehend who he was, but when I looked into his eyes, I knew. I knew it was Jesus. But not in the way I had imagined him in stories or teachings. This was no mere man, no prophet of old. This was something greater, something transcendent. He stood with such authority, such majesty, that it took my breath away. I knew, without a doubt in my heart, that this was the Lord. The one I had heard about but had never fully understood. The one who had been with me all along, even when I hadn't recognized him. His gaze was all-knowing, and as our eyes met, I felt as though he could see everything. Every corner of my soul, every dark thought, every secret regret. He saw it all, every mistake, every moment of pride and judgment, every time I had faltered. But in that gaze, there was no condemnation, no anger. There was only love, pure, unblemished, and infinite. It wasn't a love based on my worthiness, but simply a love that accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. And in that acceptance, I felt more seen, more understood, than I ever had in my life. There was no need for words between us. In his presence, all communication was unspoken but clear. I understood everything at that moment. Everything I had ever questioned, everything I had ever wondered about faith, life, and purpose. I understood my shortcomings, and my failures to live up to the ideals I had set for myself. I had clung so tightly to my faith, to the rituals, to the doctrines, thinking they were the answer to everything. I had judged others for not sharing the same beliefs, and for not walking the same path. I had believed that my way was the only way, and in doing so, I had failed to see the beauty and truth in the lives of others. In his presence, I saw the truth. I saw the truth of who I had been, but also the truth of who I could become. This was not a moment of shame, but a moment of grace. It wasn't a moment of condemnation, but a moment of understanding. The walls I had built around my heart came crashing down, and in their place was something new. Something more whole, more complete, more connected. And with that, I found the peace I had been searching for my whole life. I found the truth that transcended all else. Love, not as a concept, but as a living, breathing force that connects all of us. And in that moment, I was free. Free from the judgments, free from the doubts, free from the fear that had once held me captive. I was finally, fully, and completely free. I had spent so many years teaching my children the beliefs that had been instilled in me. The belief that non-Muslims were destined for hell, that their faiths were false, and that my own was the only true path. I passed on a kind of spiritual arrogance, a deep-seated conviction that those who did not follow Islam, as I understood it, were damned. It's heartbreaking now to realize how much of that narrow, judgmental perspective I passed on to my children. But at that moment, as I stood in the presence of Jesus, I felt no anger or condemnation in his gaze, just an overwhelming flood of love. His eyes didn't scold me for the years of arrogance, nor did they condemn me for the harm I had unknowingly caused others. Instead, there was a deep, gentle sorrow in his gaze, a sorrow for the pain I had inflicted on myself and those around me. I felt a profound sense of remorse, but there was no shame, only a deep, abiding sense of love and the quiet understanding that he was offering me a path toward healing. As the weight of these realizations sank in, something truly incredible began to unfold. I was shown visions that shook me to my core. I could no longer rely on the history I had been taught, the history that had been sanitized, molded, and spoon-fed to me in a way that protected the narrative I had always believed. The truth I saw in these visions was raw, unfiltered, and terrifying. I was taken back in time to the cave of Hira, the place where Muhammad first received what he believed were divine revelations. In the teachings I had once embraced, I had always been told that it was the angel Gabriel who had visited him, bringing God's word. But what I saw in that cave was not divine. It was dark, twisted, and far removed from anything holy. The presence that surrounded Muhammad wasn't the angel Gabriel. It was something far more sinister. Deceptive forces, masked in brilliant light, crept into the cave. These beings exuded an insidious charm that twisted the truth and filled Muhammad's mind with ideas that would later become the foundation of the Quran. Their whispers were subtle, but their influence was undeniable. Fear, ambition, and manipulation seeped into Muhammad's thoughts, distorting the message and turning it into a system that controlled its followers with the heavy burden of submission, trapping them in cycles of self-righteousness. I trembled as I understood this. The truth hit me with the force of a thunderclap. The Islam I had dedicated my life to, the path I had believed was the only path to salvation, was not the path of truth at all. It was a distortion, a trap cleverly designed to keep me from recognizing the true nature of God. It was an elaborate lie, one that kept me blind to the unconditional love of God, a love that transcends faith, background, or history. It was a revelation that left me shaken to my very core. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. And yet, even with this heartbreaking realization, Jesus did not condemn me. I felt a profound sense of relief, mixed with sorrow. I had spent my entire life building my identity around a lie. But instead of judgment, Jesus offered me compassion and a pathway to redemption. His love reached out to me, welcoming me not as a lost soul but as one who had been found. I felt the weight of my former beliefs, the beliefs that had defined so much of my existence, lift from me like a great burden being taken away. For the first time in my life, I knew what it meant to be truly free. It was no longer about following rituals or adhering to a set of rules. It was about embracing the love and grace of God, love that knew no boundaries, no conditions, no barriers. As the vision faded and I found myself back in the glowing presence of Jesus, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. But it wasn't just the peace of having found the truth. It was the peace that came from knowing that the journey had just begun. I wasn't sure what awaited me, but I knew, deep down, that I had finally found the real truth. This was not a truth based on doctrine, rituals, or intellectual arguments. This was a truth that lived in my heart, at the very core of who I was. This was a truth that could not be taken away. As the light around Jesus grew brighter still, I felt the weight of his presence once more. He was no longer just a figure in a vision. He was a living, breathing reality, surrounding me with love and truth in a way that was beyond words. And then, without uttering a single word, Jesus began to show me the profound, painful, and beautiful truth of his crucifixion and resurrection. For so long, I had dismissed these events as myths or fabrications, even arguing against their significance. But what I experienced in that moment was not just a vision. It was an all-encompassing immersion into the reality of his sacrifice. I saw Jesus on the cross, his body broken and bloodied, hanging there in agony. The weight of humanity's sin pressed down upon him like an unbearable burden. But it wasn't just the physical pain I felt at that moment. I felt the spiritual anguish, the deep separation from God the Father. I could feel the despair, the loneliness, the abandonment he experienced as he bore the sins of the world. And yet, in the midst of it all, there was an overwhelming love. It was a love so pure, so selfless, that I could hardly comprehend it. It wasn't a love that sought to gain anything for itself. It was a love that gave everything, even to the point of death. I understood, in that moment, what I had never truly grasped before. This wasn't the story of a man who had been falsely accused or a prophet who had been misunderstood. This was the story of the Savior of the world, willingly giving his life for the redemption of all humanity. He endured that pain, that suffering for me, so that I could be free. And in that moment, I realized that the truth of his love had always been there, waiting for me to recognize it, to accept it. It was a truth that broke me open, shattering the walls I had spent so many years building around my heart. But in that brokenness, there was healing. I had been blind for so long, but now my eyes were opened. I was no longer a prisoner of my past beliefs, my arrogance, or my ignorance. I was free, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly at peace. In the light of Jesus, I found my redemption. And though I knew the road ahead would be difficult, I also knew that I had been given a gift, a new beginning. The love of Jesus had set me free, and nothing, not even the weight of my past, could ever take that freedom away. I witnessed the resurrection not as a distant event I had once scoffed at, but as a profound, victorious truth that resonated deeply within my being. Jesus rose in glory, utterly triumphant, defeating death and sin. The power of that act reverberated through the spiritual realm like a mighty wave, a victorious declaration of God's infinite love and perfect justice. The teachings I had clung to in Islam, those that denied Jesus' divinity, his death on the cross, and his resurrection, crumbled under the weight of this earth-shattering revelation. I realized, at that moment, that denying the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus was not merely a misunderstanding. It was the greatest deception of all, a lie so deeply rooted and carefully orchestrated that it had kept billions from knowing the fullness of God's love and the path to salvation. I stood in awe, reeling from the depth of these truths, as they unfolded before me like a flood of light. Then, with a profound gentleness, Jesus began to reveal to me the mystery of the Trinity, something I had once rejected as blasphemy, a concept I had misunderstood and vilified. He didn't explain it with words or logic, but allowed me to experience it in my very soul. In that moment, I saw how the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit existed in perfect unity, distinct in their roles, yet inseparable in their essence. It wasn't the confusing, polytheistic idea I had been taught to scorn. It was a divine truth so beautiful, so pure, that I was overcome with a sense of peace and awe. The Father's love, the Son's sacrifice, and the Holy Spirit's guidance weren't separate acts. They were manifestations of one divine essence, an eternal and inseparable relationship. The Trinity was not something to fear or dismiss. It was the very foundation of God's love for humanity and His desire for us to live in unity with Him. But the revelations didn't stop there. Jesus showed me how the eschatology of Islam, the teachings about the end times, had been carefully crafted to mislead and obscure the truth. I saw how the portrayal of Isa, the Islamic version of Jesus, was a twisted counterfeit, designed to prepare Muslims to reject the true Christ. In Islam, Isa was said to return to abolish Christianity and lead Muslims to ultimate victory, a narrative that directly contradicted the truth of Jesus' second coming. I realized, with a heavy heart, that this was not just a theological misunderstanding but a calculated strategy by forces of deception to keep millions of souls in spiritual darkness, to prevent them from embracing the light of Christ. As the truth of these revelations continued to unfold, the weight of them pressed heavily upon me, but it wasn't until the next vision that I was truly broken. Jesus showed me the torment of souls who had died believing in Islam. These were not souls condemned for their sincerity or devotion, but souls trapped by the tragic consequence of rejecting the truth. I witnessed their anguish, their cries of regret and despair echoing through eternity. They had lived their lives with such fervent faith, believing they were serving God, only to realize too late that they had been deceived into following a lie. Amid these tormented souls, I saw faces I knew, friends, family members, and even religious leaders whom I had once held in high regard. One face, in particular, haunted me. It was the face of my uncle, a man of deep faith, a devout scholar who had dedicated his life to studying and memorizing the Quran. I watched as his once sturdy faith shattered into a million pieces, his eyes wide with horror as he realized the grave error of his beliefs. The agony in his eyes was unbearable. He was not just grieving for himself, but for the countless lives he had influenced, for the many people he had led astray, unknowingly guiding them down a path of destruction. His pain was not just for what he had lost, but for the lives he had unknowingly misled. The depth of his anguish was so palpable that I felt as if my own heart was being torn apart. I couldn't help but weep as I witnessed these souls of people who had lived their entire lives devoted to a faith, who had loved and served what they thought was God, only to realize too late that they had been deceived by the enemy's lies. The regret in their eyes, the weight of their realization, was a pain unlike anything I had ever felt. The cries of those souls reverberated through the very core of my being as if their suffering had become a part of me. But even in the depths of this sorrow, Jesus' presence remained with me. He did not leave me in despair. His love was still there, shining through, offering hope even in the darkest of moments. I realized in the depths of my sorrow that it was His love, His relentless love for each soul, that had led me to this moment of truth. And it was that same love that would guide me forward, not with condemnation, but with compassion. Though the weight of these revelations was almost too much to bear, I knew that I had been given a great gift. In the depths of my grief, I realized that the path of salvation is not one of condemnation or hatred. It is one of love, of truth, of redemption. I understood, with a clarity I had never known before, that the journey I had embarked upon had not been about seeking to prove my righteousness or superiority. It had always been about seeking the truth. And now, I had found it. I could no longer live in ignorance or denial. The truth had been revealed to me in a way that I could not deny, no matter how painful or difficult it was to accept. But in that truth, there was also healing. There was grace. And most of all, there was love. It was this love, the love of Jesus Christ, that would sustain me as I navigated the path ahead, no matter how challenging it might be. Because, ultimately, the truth I had found was not a burden. It was a gift. And with that gift, I would carry the message of God's love to those who needed to hear it, so that they, too, could be freed from the chains of deception and experience the fullness of His grace. Through all of this, Jesus' love never wavered. His heart broke for the souls I had seen in torment, not out of anger, but out of a profound longing for them to have known the truth. I felt that same love extend to me, an undeniable reminder that despite my past mistakes and missteps, He had brought me to this moment of understanding. This moment, where I could embrace His gift of salvation, was the result of His boundless grace, not my worthiness. As I stood in His presence, I realized that these revelations weren't simply truths to be acknowledged, but calls to action. The life I had lived, the faith I had so fiercely defended, had been built on a foundation of falsehoods. Yet, standing in the brilliant light of Jesus, I knew that this truth wasn't meant to crush me but to set me free. Free from the bondage of lies, free from the weight of spiritual blindness, and free to embrace a life of hope, love, and purpose. In that moment, I felt a love so deep and all-encompassing that it left me breathless. But within that love, a responsibility began to take shape. The truth I had been shown wasn't just for me. It was for those I loved. It was as if Jesus' gaze, both gentle and serious, pierced through me and into the very depths of my soul. And in an instant, He began to show me visions of my children. At first, I saw a future where they continued down the path I had set for them, a life deeply rooted in Islam. I saw Sophia, my eldest, reciting the Quran with pride, just as I once had. She was leading her children to follow the same faith, the same rituals, the same empty doctrines. Amir, confident in his faith, grew into a man who was distant from the truth. Lena, so innocent, grew into a woman who wore her hijab proudly but was trapped in the same spiritual blindness I had once embraced. In this vision, their lives appeared outwardly full, secure within their community, and respected for their devotion. Yet, I saw the emptiness that weighed on their souls, a deep void that they could never fill, a void that had haunted me for so long but that I had failed to acknowledge. As the vision of their lives unfolded, I saw their eventual deaths and the heartbreaking reality that awaited them. Separated from God, consumed by deep regret, agony, and an irreversible sorrow. The vision shattered me. They were my children, my precious treasures, and I had unknowingly led them down this path. But then, Jesus revealed to me another future, a future where my children found salvation in Him. In this vision, their lives were transformed. Sophia, no longer bound by the rigidity of Islamic law, radiated with joy and peace that I had never seen before. Amir, once so confident in his religious convictions, became a man who understood the depth of grace and love that only Christ could offer. Lena's face was full of light, her innocence now matched by a profound, abiding faith in the one true God. In this future, they were free, truly free. The peace that surrounded them was unlike anything I could have imagined. Tears streamed down my face as these visions faded, and a weight settled heavily on my heart. I knew without being told that I had a role to play in leading them to this truth. This wasn't about forcing them to believe or trying to convince them through debate and argument. It was about living a life that reflected the love, grace, and mercy of Christ in every action and every word. It was about sharing my story, no matter the cost, and trusting that God would work through me to reach their hearts. Jesus' love for my children overwhelmed me, but it didn't stop there. His love expanded, embracing Muslims as a whole, not as a faceless group, but as individual souls, each deeply known and cherished by Him. I saw His heart breaking for them, for the sincerity and devotion they had offered up in the name of God, only to be misdirected by lies. The pain of their misguided faith was mirrored in Jesus' compassionate heart, and I understood, in that moment, that His love for them was as deep as His love for me. Every single soul was precious to Him. He didn't just want me to witness His truth. He wanted me to share it, to reach out in love to those who were still lost in darkness. The responsibility was heavy, but it was also a gift. I had been entrusted with the most precious message of all, the message of salvation through Jesus Christ. And now, more than ever, I felt the urgency to live out this truth, to love my children, my community, and all those around me with the same love that had been shown to me. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I knew it was the path I was meant to walk, not just for myself, but for all those I held dear. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. I saw how he longed for them to know the truth, to experience the freedom and joy that only he could offer. His love for them was not diminished by their rejection of him. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger, more determined. His heart beat with an unrelenting desire for every soul to find the same peace and salvation that I had discovered. It was a love so pure and unwavering that it left me in awe. Then, in that moment, I saw myself, not as the person I had been, but as the person I was called to become. I understood with clarity that everything I had experienced, all the revelations and the pain, was not just for me. It was for others. Jesus had shown me these truths so that I could share them, so that I could help free those who were still trapped in the deception I had once believed. My testimony was not just a story to be told, it was a light to be shared in the darkness, a beacon of hope for those still lost. But with that call came a sobering realization. Jesus began to show me the cost of sharing this truth. The path ahead would not be easy, and I saw it unfold before me in a series of painful visions. I saw Omar, my husband, his face twisted in anger and disbelief as I tried to explain my experience to him. I could feel his rejection, his refusal to accept the truth I had been shown. I saw him turning our children against me, using the very teachings I had instilled in them to convince them that I had lost my way, that I had strayed too far from the faith. Then I saw my community, the people I had once prayed alongside, the friends I had taught and trusted. I saw them turning their backs on me, branding me an apostate. Some looked at me with pity, others with disgust, and still others with outright hatred. I saw my name being whispered in disdain, my reputation tarnished, and the respect I had once known slipping away like sand through my fingers. The life I had built, the foundation I had spent years cultivating, would be gone. The weight of it all felt suffocating, the consequences of speaking this truth daunting. Yet, even as I watched these painful scenes unfold, I could feel Jesus' love and presence surrounding me. It gave me strength, not in the absence of pain, but in the midst of it. His love was constant, a steady anchor in the storm. He didn't promise that it would be easy, but he assured me that I would never be alone. His light would guide me through the darkest moments, his love would sustain me when I felt weak, and his truth would be my foundation, unshakable and eternal. And then, in that quiet moment of communion, Jesus spoke. Not with words, but with a clarity that resonated deep within my soul. He told me that my time here in this place of light and truth was coming to an end. I was to return to the world, to my life, and to share the vision I had seen, to bear witness to the truth I had received. The weight of the mission he had given me was both humbling and overwhelming, but I knew it was what I was meant to do. I wasn't just returning to the world to live a normal life. I was being sent as a messenger, a living testimony of his love, his truth, and the freedom he offers. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and sacrifices, but I also knew that in sharing the truth of Jesus, I would find my truest purpose. As I prepared to leave that sacred place, a peace washed over me. Peace not because the journey ahead would be easy, but because I was no longer walking it alone. With Jesus at my side, I knew that no matter the opposition, no matter the cost, I would remain steadfast in the truth he had revealed to me. His love would carry me, his grace would sustain me, and his light would never fail to lead me home. As we come to the end of this journey together, I want to take a moment to reflect on everything we've shared. We've walked through deep revelations, challenging realizations, and powerful moments of transformation. But what stands out most is the undeniable truth of Jesus' love, a love that has the power to break through the deepest deceptions and set us free. I encourage you to think about what you've learned in this video. What truths stood out to you the most? And how can you apply these lessons in your own life, moving forward with a heart full of grace and purpose? I would love to hear from you. Please share one thing you've learned today and how you'll bring it into practice in your life. Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. And if this video resonated with you, don't forget to leave your comment, like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more impactful content. Your support helps us continue sharing messages of hope and truth.